If you're so smart, then translate it. 15 interpreters failed, but the cleaners spoke up. 10 languages. Aisha Kofi was pushing her cleaning cart down the corridor of the Apex Health Institute's executive wing in Manhattan. Her blue uniform was faded at the elbows. Her sneakers, the cheap kind with thin soles that wore through in 3 months, made almost no sound against the polished floor. Her hands cracked at every knuckle from 4 years of industrial cleaning chemicals. Had gripped the mop handle the way a person grips something when there is nothing else left to hold on to. It was almost midnight, but the lights inside the administrative conference suite on the 8th floor were blazing like it was the middle of the afternoon. And that could only mean one thing: trouble. Apex Health Institute was not just a hospital. It was one of the most prestigious private medical institutions in the country. And 3 months ago, it had entered negotiations with a French-Canadian medical research consortium called Centre Blanc Research, a group that controlled funding for some of the most advanced oncology treatments in the world. The deal on the table would bring a $200 million research partnership to Apex's oncology division. 15 interpreters had been called in that evening and fired one by one, and every single one had failed to correctly translate the binding partnership agreement sitting on the conference table. All 87 pages of it, and the entire negotiation was on the edge of collapse. Then Nathan Reed, the man who had built Apex Health Institute from a struggling community clinic in Brooklyn into one of the most respected private medical institutions on the East Coast, slammed his fist so hard on the conference table that the water glasses rattled, and looked at the 16th interpreter, who had just walked in trembling, and said in a voice that cut through the room like a blade, "If you're so smart, then translate this contract right. Because Centre Blanc Research is about to walk. And if they do, I promise you, tonight will be the worst night of your professional life." Aisha stopped mopping. Through the thin gap of the conference suite door, left slightly ajar, she could see them. Daniel Hayes, Apex's chief financial officer, rubbing his temples with both hands like a man trying to massage away a migraine that had been building for hours. Simon Blake from legal, scribbling furiously in his notepad, his pen moving without direction. And at the far end of the table, arms crossed, the only person in the room who did not look desperate was Sophia Vance. Sophia Vance, chief counsel of Apex Health Institute, Stanford educated, perfectly dressed, and the kind of composure that made people assume she had answers, even when she was the reason there were none. On the massive monitor mounted on the wall, the representative from Centre Blanc Research, a composed man named Pierre Laurent, watched the chaos with an expression that had shifted slowly from patience to something that looked very much like finality. His eyes, sharp and unhurried, were the eyes of a man who had not survived 40 years in international medical research by wasting time on people who could not deliver. "Il est presque temps de partir," he murmured to his colleague beside him. "It is almost time to leave." Aisha heard it clearly through the gap in the door. She whispered it back in French without thinking, her lips moving before her brain told them to stop. The room went silent. Every head turned and every pair of eyes found the gap in the doorway where Aisha stood frozen. One hand on the mop handle, one hand on the edge of the cleaning cart, her blue uniform, her cracked hands, the cloth tucked into her side pocket, the small Apex Health Institute ID badge clipped to her collar, the one that said facility staff, night shift. Nathan Reed turned his head slowly, and for the first time in 4 years of walking past her in these corridors without a second glance, he saw her. If you're enjoying this story, do me a favor and hit that like button. It means more than you know. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because what Aisha said in that conference room did not just save a $200 million deal. It changed everything. And I mean everything. Nathan Reed did not shout. He never needed to. He simply looked toward the door and spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had built an institution from nothing and was not accustomed to repeating himself. "Bring her in." The 2 security officers flanking the door stepped aside, and Aisha Kofi, cleaning cart left in the corridor, stepped across the threshold of the Apex conference suite for the first time in 4 years. Not to empty the trash, not to wipe down the screens, but to enter the room as a person. And her worn sneakers made almost no sound on the floor. But in that silence, they landed like a drum beat. Sophia Vance was the first to speak. She leaned forward in her chair, her voice carrying the elegant contempt of someone who had never once questioned her own superiority. Nathan. She said his name with a small polished smile. This is the cleaning staff. She did not look at Aisha when she said it. She said it the way people talk about furniture, and Aisha felt the weight of those words press into her chest, but she did not lower her eyes. 4 years of being invisible had not broken her. It had made her precise. It had made her patient. Sophia had spent those 4 years finding small public ways to remind everyone in the building who she considered beneath her. Cutting off name mid-sentence in the security briefings, throwing blessings proposals in the recycling bin in front of colleagues, or looking through Jerome in the corridor the way people look through glass. Aisha had watched all of it. She had felt some of it herself, and she had said nothing because she understood that her moment had not yet come. Now it had. Daniel Hayes looked up from his hands. Simon Blake stopped writing, and on the screen, Pierre Laurent leaned forward, studying Aisha through the monitor with the focused expression of a man recalibrating. He spoke in French, slow and deliberate. Comprenez-vous le français? Aisha set her jaw, walked to the conference table, picked up the 87-page contract from among the cold coffee cups and scattered ballpoint pens, and began turning pages at a speed that made Daniel Hayes sit up straight in his chair. Oui, Monsieur Laurent, she answered. Her accent was precise. Her register was formal. Her French was the kind you learn from someone who loves the language, not just studies it. Now, Laurent removed his reading glasses, leaned back, and watched her. Aisha turned to page 11. Here, she said, her finger pressing firmly on the clause. The translation says that Apex will retain full ownership of all jointly developed medical research and intellectual property arising from this partnership. But Centre Blanc Research's original French text uses the phrase copropriété conjointe, joint co-ownership, which under French law means both parties hold equal and independent rights to publish, license, and commercialize the same research simultaneously without needing the other's consent. These are not the same thing. Under the translated version, Apex believes it owns the research outright. Under the original, Centre Blanc Research can share those same medical findings with any competing institution they choose. In oncology, where a single patent can be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, that single misread phrase could cost this institution everything it hopes to gain. The room collapsed into silence. Daniel Hayes went completely still, both hands flat on the table. Simon Blake dropped his pen. Sophia Vance did not move, but her smile disappeared, and underneath the perfect composure, something shifted, something cold. Page 35. Aisha continued, her voice steady as a straight line. The funding disbursement structure. The translation describes milestone-based payments released when each phase of the research program is marked complete. But the original French uses the word réception, which in French commercial practice does not simply mean completed. It means formally received and accepted after a defined inspection and approval process by the funding party. Under French law, that distinction gives Centre Blanc Research the right to withhold every single payment until they formally certify each research phase to their own satisfaction with no deadline to do so. Apex could deliver years of work and wait indefinitely for funding with no legal recourse under the terms as written. That's impossible, Simon Blake said, reaching for the contract. Read Clause 4, subsection B of the original, Aisha said quietly and turned it to face him. He read it, his face went the color of chalk. Page 72. She flipped forward. The termination clause. The translation states that either party may exit the agreement with 90 days written notice if research benchmarks are not met. But the original French specifies that the notice must be delivered en recommandé, reception by registered post with confirmed receipt, and that the 90-day window does not begin until that receipt is formally acknowledged in writing by the other party. There is no time limit on how long the other party can delay that acknowledgement. In practice, under French procedural law, a party could receive a termination notice and simply choose not to acknowledge it, keeping the contract alive and all obligations binding for as long as they wished. If Apex ever needed to exit this deal, they could find themselves legally trapped with no clean way out. The silence that followed was the kind that comes after something has already broken and everyone is simply waiting to find out how badly on the screen. Pierre Laurent folded his hands on the desk, looked directly at Aisha, and spoke slowly in French. Each word chosen with the precision of a man who had not survived 40 years in international medical research by missing what mattered. "Madam, you just told the truth where 15 people chose to lie." The word lied landed on the table like a stone, not made a mistake, not failed to understand, chose to lie. Nathan Reed had not spoken since the moment he ordered her brought in. He stood at the head of the table with both hands braced against the dark wood, his eyes fixed on Aisha, the way a man looks at something he cannot yet fully explain. His jaw was tight, the kind of tight that happens when a person is thinking faster than the room around them can follow. He asked one question, "Who are you?" Aisha did not answer immediately. She set the contract down on the table, looked at her hands for a moment, then looked up at Nathan Reed with the steady, unashamed gaze of someone who had decided somewhere in the last 90 seconds that she was done being invisible. "I am the person who has been listening," she said. Her voice was quiet, unhurried. It carried no anger, but it carried weight. "For 4 years, I have cleaned these rooms. I have wiped down these screens, emptied these bins, mopped these floors while every person in this building walked past me as though I did not exist. And because no one guards what they say around the person cleaning the floor, I have heard things, important things, things I have been waiting for the right moment to say." Sophia Vance shifted in her chair. The movement was small, almost nothing. But Aisha had been watching Sophia Vance for 4 years, and she noticed everything. "Where did you learn French like that?" Daniel Hayes asked. "Where did you come from before you were here?" "I graduated top of my class from Georgetown University," Aisha said. "Applied linguistics with a specialization in translation studies. I am fluent in 10 languages. French, English, Yoruba, Igbo, Spanish, Portuguese, Mandarin, German, Italian, and Arabic. My mother taught me French first before any school ever did." The room sat with that for a moment. 10 languages. Georgetown. Top of her class, mopping floors at midnight. No one asked the obvious question out loud, but everyone was thinking it. "The first 2 interpreters you called tonight translated correctly," she continued, and she watched Sophia Vance go very still. "They were replaced because they were correct. The 13 who followed them were not unqualified. They were paid to be wrong. And the person who arranged it, yes, the person who has been controlling which interpreters were selected for every Apex deal involving French-speaking partners for the past 3 years, is sitting at this table." The silence detonated. Daniel Hayes turned his head towards Sophia Vance. Simon Blake stopped breathing mid-inhale. Nathan Reed slowly, deliberately straightened from the table to his full height. Sophia Vance laughed. It was a beautiful laugh, soft and disdainful, the kind practiced in mirrors. "Nathan," she said, looking only at him, "this is a cleaning woman making wild accusations against your chief counsel in front of a live negotiation." "I have evidence," Aisha said. 3 words, said the way a person says something they have been holding for a very long time. She reached into the deep front pocket of her uniform, the kind of pocket that security never checks because who checks the cleaner's pockets, and pulled out a small voice recorder, old, scratched. The recording light faded from years of use. 6 weeks ago, she said, pressing play. I was restocking cleaning supplies in the closet beside the 7th floor private meeting room at 11:30 at night. The ventilation shaft runs directly between the two rooms. Sound carries clearly. A voice came through the speaker, precise, unhurried, female. A voice that everyone in the room had heard hundreds of times, giving legal counsel, running meetings, managing crises with elegant, unshakable calm. The Blanc deal cannot close. Not yet. Every time it gets close, we delay it. Another failed interpreter. Another round of renegotiation. We collect the advisory fees. Legal drowns in the revision cycle. And Nathan keeps coming to me to manage the fallout. The longer this runs, the more indispensable I become. And when the deal finally dies completely, we position ourselves to broker the replacement agreement entirely on our own terms. A second voice, quieter male. And if someone figures it out, Sophia Vance's voice again without a single beat of hesitation. No one is going to figure it out. I choose the interpreters. I manage the process. And nobody in that building pays any attention to anything that isn't on a screen. Aisha closed the recorder. The voice of Sophia Vance hung in the air of the conference suite like smoke after something has burned. Nathan Reed was looking at Sophia now with an expression Aisha could not fully read, but she could feel it from across the room. It was not just anger. It was something deeper, something more complicated. The kind of expression that forms on a person's face when they realize that someone they brought close, someone they trusted, someone they believed was standing beside them had been standing behind them the entire time. Sophia Vance opened her mouth, then she closed it because there was nothing left to say. Her own voice had said all of it. Daniel Hayes said very quietly, "How long have you known?" "I recorded that conversation 6 weeks ago," Aisha said. "But I have been collecting evidence for over 2 years. I did not come forward sooner because I knew what it would look like." A night shift cleaner accusing the chief counsel of a major medical institution. I needed it to be undeniable. The room took a long collective breath. On the screen, Pierre Laurent had not moved or spoken. He had simply watched. The way a man watches when he is recalculating everything he thought he understood about the room in front of him. Now he leaned toward his microphone. "Miss." He paused, waiting. "Kofi," Aisha said. "Aisha Kofi." "Miss Kofi," Laurent said. "Centre Blanc Research would like to request that you personally complete the translation of this contract tonight." "We will wait." Nathan Reed looked at Aisha, and his voice when he spoke was different from any version of his voice she had heard all evening, still controlled, still precise. But something in it had shifted. The way the air shifts before weather changes. "What do you need?" he asked. Aisha set her terms. A workstation connected to the Apex document management system. Access to the original French filing documents for every previous deal with European medical partners so I can cross-reference technical and clinical terminology, and when I am finished a private conversation with you. Daniel Hayes blinked. Simon Blake looked up with visible surprise. From the far end of the table, Sophia Vance opened her mouth, but Nathan raised one hand without looking at her, and she closed it. "Agreed," he said. Aisha sat alone at a workstation in the adjacent office for the next 4 hours, the 87-page contract on one side, her reference files open on the other, a cup of tea cooling forgotten beside the keyboard. She worked in silence and at speed. Medical French is its own specialized register here. The kind that sounds close to general French but carries the precision of a completely different discipline. A phrase like protocole de soins partagés does not simply mean shared care. It carries specific obligations about how clinical decisions must be coordinated between institutions, how liability flows when those decisions intersect, and what happens when the two sides disagree. And getting it wrong by even one word can expose an institution to legal challenges that take years and tens of millions of dollars to resolve. Aisha got nothing wrong. 3 hours and 40 minutes later, just before 4 in the morning, she walked back into the conference suite and placed the translated contract on the table. The room was still occupied. Nathan had not left. Daniel Hayes was on his 3rd cup of coffee. Even Simon Blake, who Aisha had never once seen stay past 9 at night, was still there. Lawrence's team read the new translation in near silence, passing pages between them, murmuring, pointing, comparing. It took 22 minutes. Then Laurent looked into the camera and smiled. And it was the smile of a man who had spent decades learning that the most valuable thing in any partnership is not money, not research, not prestige. It is trust. Perfect. He said, not a single error. Miss Kofi, your translation is not only correct, it is better than our original legal drafting. You caught an ambiguity in our own research liability clause that our team missed entirely. He paused. I have one condition before we sign. The room held its breath. All communication between Centre Blanc Research and Apex Health Institute for the full duration of this partnership must go through Miss Kofi. Every document, every call, every negotiation. She is the only person in this building I trust. Sophia Vance was suspended pending investigation before the sun came up. By 7 in the morning, Daniel Hayes had pulled 3 years of interpreter invoices, traced the payment trail to a shell consulting company, and found a financial pattern so methodical it was almost architectural. Sophia had been doing this across multiple deals, across multiple years, from inside the institution that trusted her most. She had been close to Nathan, not despite knowing the damage she was causing, but because of it. Using that proximity to manage the fallout she herself was engineering, appearing indispensable at every crisis she had secretly created. Nathan understood exactly what that meant. He had been married once to a woman named Laura, who had come into his life when Apex was still small and uncertain and the kind of venture that could have gone either way. He had loved her the way a person loves when they believe the other person is there for the same reasons. It took a forensic accountant hired during the divorce proceedings to show him in very clear numbers that Laura had always known what Apex would become and had positioned herself accordingly. She had not loved what he was building. She had loved what it was going to be worth. He had spent the years since then working harder, trusting less, building higher walls. And then Sophia Vance had walked through those walls so smoothly, so intelligently that he had not noticed the door closed behind her. She had known his language, precision, strategy, control, and he had made the oldest mistake in the world. He had confused familiarity with safety. Now he stood at the service exit at 7:15 in the morning, tie gone, sleeves rolled up, and watched Aisha come through the door the same way she had come through it every morning for 4 years. You asked for a private conversation, he said. I did, she said. Tell me why, he said. Not the degree, not the languages. Tell me why you are here. Aisha looked at the street in front of her. Early morning Manhattan, the city just beginning its slow transition from night to day. She had kept this story inside her for 4 years, telling herself it was nobody's business, telling herself it did not matter where she came from, only where she was. But she was tired of carrying it alone. My mother, she said. Her name is Elena. She is a patient here. Has been for 2 years in the oncology ward on the 5th floor. Nathan went still. I clean this building every night, Aisha continued. And every morning I walk down to the 5th floor before I leave and sit beside her bed for an hour before she wakes up. I have done that every single day for 2 years. And nobody in this building has ever known because nobody ever looks at the cleaner long enough to wonder where she goes. She paused. Her own mother, my grandmother, was an interpreter for the French consulate in Lagos during the 1970s and 80s. She was exceptional with languages. She spoke 6 fluently and she passed every one of them to my mother along with the discipline that comes with translation work. The belief that words matter, that choosing the right word in the right language in the right moment can change a life. As my mother passed all of it to me, sitting with me every evening from the time I was 4 years old, languages were not a subject in our house. They were an inheritance, a connection across 3 generations. She called them the most portable wealth a person could own. Nathan did not speak. He listened the way people listen when they understand that the story is not finished. I went to Georgetown on a full scholarship, top of my class. I had already been accepted into a doctoral program when my mother was diagnosed. Stage 3 colorectal cancer. My father passed when I was 12. I am her only family in this country. The scholarship covered tuition. The doctoral program had a stipend. And what my mother needed was a salary. She said the number plainly. The way a person states a fact they have already made peace with carrying. Over 4 years between the surgery, the chemotherapy, the immunotherapy, and the ongoing treatment, I have paid just over $480,000 in costs not covered by insurance. The facility management contract here had stable night hours. I needed to be at the hospital during the day and I could not leave because she is here and because I could not afford to lose this job before I had enough evidence to make the accusation against Sophia stick. She finally looked at him. So I stayed and I listened and I waited. Nathan Reed looked at her for a long time, not with evaluation, not with pity, with a particular quality of attention that belongs to someone who is actually seeing another person, possibly for the first time. Is she receiving treatment now? He asked. She is, but the next phase is expensive. A targeted immunotherapy protocol running is a clinical trial here at Apex. She qualifies. I just need to cover the portion not funded by the trial. How much? She told him. Nathan took out his phone, made one call, spoke for under a minute, and ended it. It is covered, he said simply. As of this morning, she will have everything she needs. Aisha looked at him. Why? She asked. Because your mother taught you something that crossed 3 generations and an ocean and landed in my building at the exact moment I needed it most, he said. And I want her to be here long enough to know what that inheritance built. Aisha did not cry, unless she had long passed the place where she cried easily. But she stood on the sidewalk outside the service entrance at 7:20 in the morning and felt something inside her chest that had been clenched for 4 years begin slowly and carefully to loosen. 3 days after Sophia's suspension, Aisha was at her new desk reviewing the Centre Blanc research documents when her phone lit up with a number she did not recognize. She answered. The voice on the other end was low, controlled, and precise. A voice she recognized immediately. You think you won something? Sophia Vance said. Aisha said nothing. Your mother is on the 5th floor, room 514. I know the name of every administrator who handles patient file access in this building. Paperwork goes missing. Treatment approvals get lost. It happens in hospitals all the time. All it takes is one call, Aisha. Just one. The line went dead. Aisha sat at her desk for exactly 4 seconds. Then she picked up her bag. She walked directly to Nathan Reed's office on the 8th floor and pushed the door open without knocking. He was on a call. He took one look at her face, ended the call without explanation, and said, "What happened?" She told him word for word the way she had trained herself to report things. Nathan went very still. The stillness of someone suppressing something enormous and choosing deliberately not to suppress it. He walked to his desk, picked up his personal phone, and made 2 calls. The first lasted 40 seconds. The second lasted less than a minute. Then he turned back to Aisha. Your mother has private security outside her room as of 20 minutes ago. He said her care team has been personally briefed. No one touches her file, her treatment schedule, or her room access without going through me. Directly. He paused. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less certain. And Sophia Vance will be arrested by 9 tomorrow morning. Because threatening a patient to silence a witness is not a civil matter, it is a criminal one. And every recording you have been collecting for 2 years just became the foundation of a federal filing. The arrest happened at 8:57 the next morning. Sophia Vance in her apartment on the Upper West Side, opening the door to 2 federal agents she had not been expecting. The warrant covered fraud, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and breach of fiduciary duty. The prosecutor described the evidence as among the most thoroughly documented cases of internal institutional fraud she had ever seen. The sentence was 9 years. The judge noted in delivering it that the particular cruelty of threatening a cancer patient in a hospital bed as leverage against a witness warranted every year of it. 9 years. On the afternoon the verdict was read, Aisha was in room 514 on the 5th floor reading aloud to her mother in French. Elena Kofi, thinner than she used to be, but sharper in the eyes, reached over and took her daughter's hand without breaking the flow of the reading. The way a person reaches for something they have always known would be there. Tout is bien fait, she said softly when Aisha finished the page. Your grandmother would be proud. 3 days after Sophia's termination, Nathan signed the paperwork that gave Aisha a small office on the 4th floor. When she walked into it for the first time, she stood in the middle of the room for a full minute without sitting down. She ran one hand along the desk surface, looked at her name printed on the temporary placard outside the door and thought about nothing in particular. Then she sat down, opened her laptop, and went back to work. That was all. No ceremony, no moment, just a woman sitting down at a desk that was now hers. Nathan came by that afternoon, not to welcome her, but to drop off a stack of documents from the Centre Blanc research legal team that needed cross-referencing before the week was out. He set them on the edge of her desk, said the French annotations on pages 12 through 19 needed to be reconciled with the English appendix before Thursday, and left. She looked at the stack. Then she opened page 12 and started reading. There was how it began. Not with warmth, not with intention. With a stack of documents and a Thursday deadline, 2 weeks later, close to 11 at night, Aisha was still at her desk when her office door pushed open. She did not look up immediately. When she did, Nathan was standing in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee from the machine at the end of the corridor, looking faintly uncertain about being there. The way a man looks when he has done something without fully deciding to do it. The machine on the 8th floor is broken, he said. Aisha looked at the cups, then at him. The 4th floor machine was in the opposite direction from his office. She said nothing. She simply reached out and took one of the cups. He sat down in the chair across from her desk and opened the folder he had brought. She went back to her own documents. They worked in silence for 40 minutes. The only sounds the occasional turn of a page and the distant hum of the building settling around them. When he stood to leave, he said the reconciliation on page 19 still had a problem in the subordinate clause. She said she knew she had been saving it for last. He looked at her for a moment, then he left. She sat with the coffee cup in her hands after he was gone, warm against her palms, and did not think anything specific. She just sat there for a minute. Then she went back to page 19. The disagreement happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after that. It was about the phrase obligation de moyens in the Centre Blanc research contract, a French legal concept that describes an obligation to use best efforts rather than to guarantee a specific result. Nathan had read the English rendering in the draft document and told her it was fine. Aisha told him it was not fine because obligation de moyens and best efforts were not the same standard under their respective legal systems. And if Apex signed on the English interpretation, they would be held to a higher bar than Centre Blanc research ever intended. Nathan said the legal team had reviewed it. Aisha said the legal team had reviewed the English. She was talking about the French. He looked at her the way he looked at people who pushed back on him. The flat assessing look that most people at Apex had learned to back away from. Aisha did not back away. She pulled up the original document, found the clause and read him the surrounding text in French, then in English, and then explained precisely where the gap opened between them. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Fix it." She fixed it. He did not apologize. But the next morning, there was a second cup of coffee on her desk when she arrived, and he was already gone. She looked at the cup. She picked it up. She drank it. A month after that, she found him in the corridor outside the 5th floor at 6:15 in the morning. She had just come from her mother's room. He had apparently arrived early and was standing at the window at the end of the hall, looking out at the city waking up below, a cup of coffee in his hand, his jacket off, his sleeves already rolled. He looked like a man who had not been to sleep. They both stopped when they saw each other. Early, she said. Board call at 7, he said. Tokyo. She nodded. She started to walk past him toward the elevator. How is she? He asked. She stopped and nobody at Apex asked her that. She had kept her mother's presence here so completely separate from her work that nobody thought to ask. She turned back. Better this week, she said. The new protocol is working. He nodded slowly. He looked like he meant it when he said, good. She pressed the elevator button. They stood in the corridor together for the 30 seconds it took the doors to open, not saying anything, the morning light coming gray and early through the 5th floor window. When the doors opened, she stepped in. He was still standing at the window when the doors closed. The night she laughed was the night something shifted, though neither of them would have been able to say so in the moment. It was late October, 2 months into her new role. They had been working through a technical annex from Centre Blanc Research's research team for 2 hours. And somewhere in the middle of a footnote about data sharing protocols under Quebec privacy law, Nathan had attempted to pronounce a French legal term from the document and had done it so completely incorrectly that Aisha looked up from her page and stared at him. He looked back at her entirely serious. She pressed her lips together. She looked back at the document. She tried. She genuinely tried. Then she laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, sudden and bright. The kind that comes from somewhere a person is not controlling. Nathan watched her laugh and said nothing. And the expression on his face was one she had never seen on him before. Not amusement. Something quieter than that. Something that did not have a clean name in English, though she knew a word for it in at least 2 other languages. She stopped laughing and looked back at the document and cleared her throat. The correct pronunciation, she said very professionally, is closer to I know what I said, he said. She kept her eyes on the page. You said it wrong on purpose, she said. And he said nothing. She looked up. His expression was completely neutral, completely unreadable, but his eyes were not. She looked back at the document. She did not laugh again, but she almost did twice more before the night was over. And both times she felt him watching her in the moment just before she caught herself. She drove home that night thinking about the footnote. That was what she told herself. The footnote. The first time their hands touched was an accident. It was November. She was reaching for a document on the corner of his desk at the same moment he reached to hand it to her, and for one suspended second their fingers were in the same space, overlapping without pressure, barely contact at all. She took the document. He pulled his hand back. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them looked at the other. The conversation continued exactly where it had been before about the disbursement timeline for the first research phase. And both of them spoke with perfect composure about disbursement timelines for the next 4 minutes. After she left his office, she stood in the corridor for a moment. She was a woman who spoke 10 languages. She had a word in at least 3 of them for what had just happened in her chest. She did not use any of them. She went back to her office and worked until midnight. In December, 3 months after everything changed, Nathan Reed told her about Laura. He did not plan to. They were sitting in her office after a long call with Laurent's team in Paris. Both of them tired, the building quiet around them, and she had said something offhand about trust, about how the hardest thing in translation was knowing which things to carry across and which things the other language simply did not have room for. He was quiet for a long moment after she said that. Then he said that he had been married once. She did not say anything. She simply waited. He told her about Laura slowly and without drama. The way a person describes a scar they have had long enough to look at without flinching. The marriage, the way he had believed in it, the forensic accountant, the number the accountant had written on the page that represented 3 years of what he had thought was a shared life. He told her about the room inside himself where he had put all of it, and about Sophia, who had walked through walls he thought were solid, and about the particular specific exhaustion of being a man who had been careful and hurt. Anyway, when he finished, the room was very quiet. Aisha looked at her hands. Then she said quietly that the ability to love someone who turned out not to deserve it was not evidence of poor judgment. It was evidence of something most people spent their whole lives trying to protect and never quite managed. She said the right person would not take it from him. They would be careful with it. He looked at her for a long time after she said that. She did not look away. And then, because she was Aisha Kofi and she had spent 4 years knowing exactly when to stay silent and exactly when to speak, she opened the next document on her desk and said, "Page 4 has a problem." He looked at the document. "Where?" He said, "Third paragraph." She said, "The subordinate clause again." He pulled his chair closer to see the page. Neither of them mentioned what had just happened, but the chair was closer than it had been before, and it stayed there. It was a Thursday evening in January when she was standing at the window of the 8th floor conference suite, the room where everything had started, looking out at a Manhattan that had gone dark and cold and blazing with its own particular winter light. She was not thinking about anything specific. She had come up here after a long day with no reason she could have explained, and she was just standing at the glass, her breath almost fogging it. The city spread out below like it always was. She heard him before she saw him, his footsteps in the corridor, unhurried, familiar. She had learned the sound of them without meaning to. The way you learn the sounds of a place you spend enough time in. He came to stand beside her at the window. Neither of them said anything for a long time. The city moved below them. A plane crossed somewhere high up, its lights blinking red and white. Then Nathan said very quietly, looking straight ahead, that he needed to tell her something, and he was going to tell her while looking out the window because he was not sure he could do it while looking at her. She did not move. She waited. He said that his marriage ended because he had chosen someone who saw him as an investment. He said that Sophia had happened because he had confused a woman who understood his language with a woman who understood him. And he said that he had spent 6 years since Laura learning to tell the difference between those two things. And that he was still not entirely sure he knew how. He paused. Then he said that when he stood here at this window at this hour, the only thing he knew with any certainty was that she was the only person in his life in a very long time who had ever cost him nothing and given him everything. And he did not know what to do with that, but he thought she should know. The city went on below. Someone somewhere honked. A bus pulled away from a stop. Aisha turned and looked at him. He was still looking out the window. His jaw was tight. His hands were at his sides, completely still. The hands of a man waiting for something he was not sure he deserved. She reached up and touched his face, just her fingers, just one hand against his jaw, turning him gently to face her. He turned, and whatever he had been about to say next, whatever careful, controlled sentence he had been preparing, he did not say it because she was right there, close enough that the distance was not really distance anymore. And he looked at her the way a man looks when he has stopped thinking and started feeling, which for Nathan Reed was a rarer and more terrifying thing than anything that had ever happened in a boardroom. He kissed her or she kissed him. Neither of them could have said afterward who moved first, which was perhaps the most honest thing about it. It was the kind of kiss that does not feel like a decision because by the time it happens, the decision has already been made. Quietly over months, in fluorescent-lit offices and early morning corridors and late nights over documents neither of them cared about as much as they were pretending to. When they pulled back, the city was still there below them, still blazing, still indifferent, still beautiful. Nathan looked at her. His expression was not the composed, controlled expression she had spent 4 years seeing across corridors and conference tables. It was something much simpler than that. Something that looked on his face almost like relief. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "Yes," she said, "you should have." He laughed once low and she felt it more than heard it. And then he pulled her in and she let him. And they stood at the window of the 8th floor conference suite at Apex Health Institute in the middle of January, holding on to each other while Manhattan burned with cold light below. And neither of them said anything else for a very long time. Spring arrived slowly that year, the way it always does in New York, 1 degree at a time, the cold loosening its grip without ever quite letting go. They did not announce anything. There was no memo, no formal change. But the building knew the way buildings always know, in the small adjustments that become visible over time. The way he walked into her office without knocking now. And she did not look up because she already knew who it was. The way she corrected him in meetings without softening it. And he listened the way he used to listen, only to the most important things. The way when something good happened, they found each other first. Elena Kofi met him in March in room 514 on a Tuesday afternoon when Apex's cherry blossom trees outside the window were just beginning to bud. Aisha had told her mother almost nothing because telling Elena Kofi something was the same as handing it to the most precise, perceptive person in the room and asking them to do whatever they wanted with it. Nathan sat down beside Elena's bed and she studied him the way she studied everything, completely and without hurry. Then she looked at Aisha and said in French, in the voice she used for things that did not require decoration. Il te regarde comme si tu étais la réponse à une question qu'il ne savait pas qu'il posait. Aisha said in French that Elena was being dramatic. Elena said in French that she was being accurate, which had always been more important. Nathan looked between the two women and asked what Elena had said. Aisha looked at him steadily. She said, "Your pronunciation is probably terrible," she said. Elena said nothing, but her eyes were warm and certain and completely satisfied. The eyes of a woman who has lived long enough to recognize the truth when it is standing right in front of her, wearing a good suit, looking at her daughter like that. It was a Wednesday evening in May, 6 months after the night at the window, when Nathan Reed did something he had done for no one in the 6 years since his divorce. He cooked dinner, not in a restaurant, not with a reservation, in his apartment in Tribeca, where Aisha had been exactly twice before, and always briefly, always for a reason that had something to do with work. He had asked her that morning in the corridor if she was free that evening. She had said yes before she asked why. He had said he would cook. She had looked at him for a moment and then said she would bring the wine. She brought a bottle of something French because of course she did. He had made something simple, pasta with a slow-cooked sauce that had been on the stove since 3 in the afternoon. And the apartment smelled like it when she walked in, and she stopped just inside the door for a moment. Something passing across her face that she did not explain. They ate at the kitchen table, which was not a formal or planned setting, just two people sitting across from each other with food and wine, and the particular ease of people who have already, without naming it, decided something. After dinner, he poured the last of the wine, and they sat in the quiet of his apartment, and she told him about the night her doctoral acceptance letter arrived, about dancing around her apartment in Morningside Heights until the neighbors knocked on the wall. He laughed. She told him about her grandmother, the one she had never met, but felt every time she sat down to work. He listened the way he had learned to listen to her, with his whole attention. Nothing left over. Then he told her about the day he decided to convert the Brooklyn clinic into what Apex would become. He had been 29. He had had no money and no guaranteed outcome. And a single conversation with a patient, a woman who had driven from New Jersey 3 times to be seen because no one closer had taken her insurance. And he had stood in the parking lot afterward and understood with complete clarity that he had to build something different or spend the rest of his life knowing he had chosen not to. Aisha listened to that story and did not say anything for a moment. Then she said quietly, "That is exactly who you are." He looked at her across the kitchen table. She looked back. The wine was finished. The city was quiet outside. The light in the kitchen was warm and low, and the kind of ordinary that secretly is not ordinary at all. He reached across the table and took her hand. Not the accident of the desk this time. Not the window with Manhattan behind them, just two people at a kitchen table and his hand over hers and the simplest possible version of what had been building between them for months. Stay, he said, just the one word. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I'll need to be at the hospital by 6. I know, he said. She stayed. He proposed on a Sunday morning in August, which was not a planned or staged or dramatic thing at all, which was perhaps exactly why it was the right thing. They were in the 5th-floor garden of Apex Health Institute, the small outdoor space that patient families used, which Aisha had discovered in her second year of cleaning the building, and had sometimes come to alone in the early mornings before her shift ended. She had brought Nathan here once before in the spring when Elena was having a hard week and Aisha had needed somewhere to stand outside for a few minutes without it meaning anything. This Sunday morning, Elena was sitting in a wheelchair in the garden with a blanket over her lap and her face turned up toward the August sun, eyes closed, looking like a woman who had decided to be completely present in a warm morning and intended to stay there for as long as possible. Nathan and Aisha were sitting on the bench beside her. Not talking, not working, just sitting, which was something they had both over the months gotten better at doing together. He had been quiet for a while, not an unusual quiet, just his quiet, the one she had learned to read as thinking rather than distance. Then he turned to look at her and she turned at the same moment and their eyes met the way they sometimes did now without preamble, just direct and clear. He said her name. She waited. He said that he had spent a very long time being a man who was careful about what he asked for because he had learned that asking opened you to an answer you might not be ready for. And he said that he had been trying to find the careful, precise, correct way to say this for several weeks and had not managed to find it. And so he was going to say it plainly. He said he wanted to marry her. He did not have a ring. He had not planned the moment. He was sitting on a hospital garden bench in a shirt with the sleeves rolled up and his coffee going cold beside him. And Elena Kofi was 3 feet away with her face turned toward the sun. And there was nothing about any of it that resembled a proposal in the way proposals are supposed to resemble proposals. Aisha looked at him. Then she looked at her mother, who had not opened her eyes, but the corner of Elena's mouth had moved very slightly upward. She had heard every word. Aisha looked back at Nathan. You don't have a ring, she said. No, he said. You didn't plan this, she said. No, he said you just said it. Yes, he said. She looked at him for a long time. This man who had built something real from nothing, who had been hurt in ways that had taught him to be careful, and who had been careful for a very long time until he wasn't. Who had stood at a window in January and told her the truth while looking out at the city because he could not do it while looking at her. Who had put a coffee on her desk without a reason and let it be what it was, which was a reason, and they had both known it. And neither of them had said so until they didn't need to anymore. She said yes. Elena Kofi opened her eyes. She looked at her daughter. She looked at Nathan and then Elena Kofi, who had survived 3 years of cancer treatment and 40 years of life in one grandmother's worth of languages and the particular specific joy of watching the right thing happen at the right time. Smiled the kind of smile that needs no translation in any language on earth on a Saturday in October. At a small ceremony in a restored brownstone in Brooklyn Heights with no press and no announcement and 41 people who mattered, Nathan Reed and Aisha Kofi were married. Elena sat in the front row in a yellow dress that made her look like she was made of light. She cried without apology from the moment the music started. And when Aisha's cousin leaned over and asked if she was all right, Elena said she was not crying because she was sad and she was not crying because she was happy. She was crying because some things were simply true. And when you had lived long enough to watch a true thing happen in front of you, your body did not always have another way to say so. Aisha stood at the front of the room in a dress she had chosen herself and said her vows in 4 languages. English because it was where they worked together. French because her mother had taught her that language first and it lived closest to her heart. Yoruba for her grandmother who had started all of this in a consulate office in Lagos decades before Aisha was born. And a single line in Igbo, which she did not translate for the room because it was for herself, for the version of herself that had spent 4 years in a blue uniform in the dark, and she wanted that version of herself to hear it. Nathan said his vows in English, except for the last line. He had been learning Yoruba since February, which Aisha had known since March and had never mentioned because she had wanted to see what he would do with it. What he did with it was look at her in front of 41 people in the afternoon light of an October afternoon and say in slow, careful, genuinely imperfect Yoruba that she was the most accurate thing that had ever happened to him. His pronunciation was imperfect, but the meaning was exact. Aisha covered her face with both hands. He reached over and gently took them down and held them and looked at her and she looked back at him and the room made the kind of sound that rooms make when something entirely real has just happened in them. Daniel Hayes's toast was too long and made 3 people cry, including himself. Pierre Laurent sent flowers from Paris with a note in French so formal it became a running joke before the appetizers arrived. And Elena Kofi sat in the front row in her yellow dress and watched her daughter stand in the afternoon light beside the man who had seen her when no one else had thought to look, and felt in her chest the quiet fullness of a woman who has lived long enough to watch the seeds she planted become something she could never have grown alone. 14 months into a 9-year sentence in a federal correctional facility in Connecticut, Sophia Vance was sitting in the common room on a Tuesday evening when the news came on the wall-mounted television. The anchor was covering the Apex Health Institute annual research gala. The camera cut to a stage. A woman in a deep green blazer addressing a room full of medical professionals and research partners. Presenting the Centre Blanc Research Oncology Partnership's first major findings, a breakthrough in immunotherapy targeting that had already been submitted to 3 peer-reviewed journals and was being described as one of the most significant developments in colorectal cancer treatment in a decade. The camera found her face in close-up as she turned from the presentation, and in that moment, the woman on the screen looked somehow directly into the room where Sophia Vance was sitting. Aisha Kofi, her name on the lower third chyron, Director of Global Medical Partnerships, Apex Health Institute, and beside her name in smaller text, research dedicated to Elena Kofi, who taught her daughter that words are the most portable wealth a person can own. Sophia Vance set down the cup in her hand. She watched the screen without moving and the expression on her face for everyone who later described seeing it was not the expression of someone watching a medical gala. It was not the expression of someone watching a person who had defeated her. It was the expression of someone who had finally, in the silence of a room she had not chosen to be in, understood the full cost of what she had spent years building, and the full weight of everything she had destroyed to build it. The television stayed on. Sophia Vance left the room. And now I want to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever been overlooked, talked past, or made to feel invisible while carrying something extraordinary inside you? Or do you know someone whose real ability the world has not yet seen? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one and I genuinely want to hear what is on your heart because every story deserves to be told and every person deserves to be seen. If this story moved you, please like it and share it with someone who needs it and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. I wish you and everyone you love good health, joy in the ordinary days, and peace in the hard ones. I will see you in the next.